Today we're going to throw something, and then we're going to throw a cup, and then later we're going to add Scgraffito, which is a technique where you add a design to the outside by putting a different color of slip or a different color of something. In this case, I'm going to use slip, which is like liquid clay, to the outside, and then you carve through the slip, and it leaves, in this case, white clay showing through, and it's going to be kind of purpley slip. So first we need to throw a piece that I think will work well for Scgraffito. Cone up and down. This clay is pretty soft already, and it's pretty much all the same texture. Not worried about getting it more all one texture. I'm really just worried about centering the clay today. Sometimes when you wedge, it's because the clay is a little hard or something, but in this case, it's not. I don't need to worry about that. So, I put my finger across here so that it will establish a middle. You'll see that when you do this, you'll see a little sort of point in the middle where all the circles come together. And that's the actual middle. That's where you want to push down to open your pot. I like to push down kind of like this or like this so that it's supported, because if you just kind of go like that, it tends to get off center, off kilter, and I don't, some people don't mind off kilter pots. I kind of do. I like my pots to look all centered and even to the degree that that's possible. So we're going to take a rib and we're going to compress the bottom. Again, this is kind of my favorite rib. You can see, I have no idea what brand it is at this point, but it has a rounded and a corner. And so I use that corner, this roundy bit, to set up the round between the floor of the piece and the wall of the piece. So I set it like this. This goes across the middle. Doesn't matter much. And then I push down. You got to be gentle enough so you're not pushing down through the clay, because you could. Clay is soft. But push down hard enough so that you actually get some, so that it's pushing down. Had people describe it as when you're handling clay, it's like you're handling it like you have a baby bird inside your hands and you want to keep it in there, but you don't want to squish it. So it's kind of that compromise between, making sure it stays in, but also not squishing it. Where'd my favorite sponge go? I don't know. People have, I'll use this one instead, but people tend to have favorite tools that they sort of latch onto as their favorite. I have no idea where my sponge went today. It's a little mud tool sponge that used to be blue, but I've used it until it's not blue anymore. This is a super smooth clay. doesn't have any, you know, grit in it. It's part of what I like, what I want to use when I do Scgraffito is something that will be nice and smooth when I carve down to it. Get rid of the water inside. We're gonna pull up one more time, I think. A little bit taller. I really like to do Scgraffito on pieces that are primarily all one direction. It's harder to do it when it's like a round, and then, you know, when you have corners and things, it works better on pieces of pottery that are at least to some degree or another all good, moving in the same direction. So like this, I'm going to aim at, I think I'm going to aim at a piece of pottery that is slightly hourglass shaped, because I think that's a fun shape for a mug. Leaves a little room for your hand. So I'm gonna, what am I doing? I need to pull a little bit on, I get a little bit more in the shoulder that I don't want. And then I'm gonna pull out at the edge a little bit here, because I actually want it to be sort of, you know, slightly, very slightly hourglass shaped. It's not going to be very hourglass shaped. Then I'm going to use a nice rubber rib to get rid of all of the ridges. I'm going to make that go in just a hair more. I think it flares a little too much. So, I'm gonna give it a little bit of push here at the very base and the inside, because I want to add a little bit of volume to the piece on the inside. I don't want it to be too small once it's fired, so we're going to do that one more time. Push out a little bit there at the bottom and pull a little bit up, pull a little bit more up. Okay, so now we have essentially inside and out a pretty nice cylinder, right? And I'm going to take my rib that's that shaped, and I'm going to push in a little bit so that it makes it a little more hourglass shaped. And then I'm going to fix this rim, which has gotten a little too wide for my taste. Super important that it is completely smooth when you're doing Scgraffito, because you're gonna, you know, paint something liquidish over it. It's not completely liquid, but sort of liquid. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of wheel trimming here. So I'm going to take this shoulder right here and I'm going to push down with my pointy tool. A wooden knife, and I'm going to undercut it just slightly so that you'll see that there's a little bit, oopsie, it's a little wet, so that there's a little bit of an undercut there. And I'm actually going to leave that undercut, although I'm going to smooth it off a tiny bit here with my finger. But I kind of want the undercut. Because part of what I like to do when I'm doing Scgraffito is set up a natural place for it to stop. If you just keep going, it tends to like have no point at which it should end, and I want a spot for it to end. And I'm going to do the same thing on the body here. I'm going to push in a little bit more, and I'm going to leave a rim. You can see there's a line here. That's where I'm going to stop my Scgraffito. So, next time we'll come back and we'll do some Scgraffito. Alright, so here we are. Good morning. We are now, and it is dry enough to touch. And I have my liquid slip. It looks like this. I'm going to paint about 4 thin layers of slip on there. My experience is that thinner layers is better than thick layers. So, and I'm going to go like this. And then I'm going to go down to where that undercut is. I don't want to go underneath the pot, although it probably will run there and I can just trim it off. So we're going to let that dry. That's okay. Alright, we are ready to do Scgraffito on our little white pot here. Once this is fired and glazed, the bluey purple will be darker. So I'm going to use, I'm having a hard time seeing what I'm doing here, this little loop tool that I have. It's my favorite one for Scgraffito. It has a little thicker loop and a little thinner loop. I like the thinner one. And what we're going to do is we're going to carve one of my favorite things. We're going to carve ripe grass on it. So so the first thing I'm going to do is carve a bunch of strands down from the base. Like grass is growing, because I want this to be sort of the sky and a field of grass against it. So you can see as I carve through it, we get little white hearts. And like grass, you want some of them to be tall and some to be short, you know, varying heights. Some of them will give, you know. Then I typically carve seed heads on the top of the tall ones. Oops. Give this a little more stuff. We want to make it look pretty full of stuff along here, so we'll carve lots of little grassy bits. And then we're back to the beginning. Then I'm going to get rid of my turntable and I'm going to go back in, see if I can get this close enough to show you. And on each of these tallest ones I'm going to do some little seeds so that it looks like it's a grass seed, grass growing, you know, wheat or grass or something going to seed. Trying to carve this so that I can, this is not the way I would normally carve things. hard to keep it in the screen and visible. Oops. So you can see this is kind of a quick way to make a really stunning piece, or not stunning is maybe not the word, but a really effective design on pottery. So I'm going to go ahead and finish. And then we'll put it back on the turntable and take a, turn it around so we can see all the finished. And we're going to I like to kind of look back and see when I'm done. Back on the turntable. The camera far enough away so we can see it. I like to look back and say, and see if I have sort of, I don't want them too obviously sort of the same amount apart. So like for example, right here, right here, right here, it feels like those are all very similar amounts between seed heads. So I'm going to add a seed head. I'm going to lower there and down here too, so that it isn't, so it feels more irregular. And then we're gonna, let's put some that aren't really down to the bottom here. I really like them all to start at the bottom. Oh, I think I'll put a seed head on this one here. Sometimes I like to put a couple, 3 right next to each other. Looks less planned. And then, so that's what we got. We'll look back when it's all fired and look at it again.